A rusted relic buried deep within the Montana wilderness. A single bone fragment with a piece of metal wedged inside. This grim discovery, made years after a pair of teenage backpackers vanished, would finally expose the horrific truth of what happened in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Before we continue, make sure you watch this entire video to find out how this chilling mystery was solved. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories. And please tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The satellite messenger was supposed to be the perfect compromise, the one piece of technology that would bridge the gap between youthful independence and parental anxiety. It was a rugged device designed to track movement and, in the event of an emergency, summon help from even the most remote corners of the planet. For Sarah Miller, it was the only reason she had managed to get any sleep. Her 19-year-old daughter, Chloe Miller, and Chloe's best friend, Samantha Hayes, were on a 3-day backpacking trip into the rugged heart of the Montana mountains. It was a Thursday morning in August of 2011, and the girls were supposed to have returned the night before. Sarah had been expecting a call around 8 p.m. on Wednesday, the usual cheerful summary of the trip's highlights. But 8 o'clock came and went. By 10 o'clock that night, worry had begun to tighten in her chest. At midnight, she was pacing back and forth, repeatedly calling both girls' cell phones, only to be met with the immediate, sterile response of their voicemails. This was a clear indication that the phones were either turned off or far from the reach of any tower. This was not entirely unexpected. The area where they were hiking was known for its spotty reception, but they were supposed to be out of the wilderness area by now and back in their car driving home. By Thursday morning, worry had turned into genuine fear. Sarah contacted Samantha's parents, who were experiencing the same growing panic. The consensus was immediate. Something was wrong. Sarah sat at her computer, her hands trembling slightly as she logged into the account associated with the satellite messenger. The girls had resisted bringing it. At 19, they felt invincible, seasoned hikers who had navigated these mountains many times before. They argued that it was unnecessary surveillance, but both sets of parents had been adamant. It was non-negotiable. Reluctantly, Chloe and Samantha had clipped the device to one of their backpacks. The tracking interface loaded on Sarah's screen, showing a topographical map of the region. Her eyes immediately searched for the last digital breadcrumb that would show their progress. But the location had not been updated. The map showed a single cluster of coordinates marking the location of their intended campsite for the first night, Monday, August 13. According to the timestamp, the device had last transmitted from that spot more than 48 hours ago. Since Tuesday morning, there had been nothing, no movement, no manual check-ins, and critically, no SOS signal had been activated. The stillness of that digital marker felt ominous. It suggested that the device, and perhaps the girls themselves, had stopped moving long before they were due to arrive home. Official missing persons reports were filed immediately with the county sheriff's office. The names Chloe Miller and Samantha Hayes entered the system. To those who knew them, they were vibrant and inseparable. Chloe with her playful energy, and Samantha, the more focused of the two, always prepared, always smiling. Both were experienced outdoor enthusiasts, deeply respectful of the wilderness, but driven by a shared passion for adventure. This particular trip had caused some hesitation among their parents. The route they had chosen was more remote and challenging than their usual spots, but they were legally adults, and their preparation had been meticulous. They had the gear, the experience, and the satellite messenger. As search and rescue teams began to mobilize, investigators started to build a timeline of their last known movements. Sarah Miller provided the authorities with recent photographs of the girls, desperate to give rescuers clear images to work with. One photo, in particular, stood out. It captured the girls at a stunning mountain overlook, a vast expanse of forested valleys and a turquoise alpine lake stretching out behind them. Samantha, wearing a neon green t-shirt and a matching baseball cap, had her arm raised high in the air, her smile wide and joyous. Chloe, in a bright pink t-shirt and a backward dark blue cap, was playfully sticking her tongue out, her arm wrapped tightly around Samantha's waist. They radiated happiness, the image of carefree adventure. Sarah confirmed she had taken that photograph just 5 days before, on Saturday, August 11. She had accompanied the girls on a preparatory hike in the region, one last outing together before their solo expedition. As search and rescue helicopters began to fly toward the last known coordinates, that image of overflowing joy was a stark contrast to the dread settling over the mountains. The coordinates provided by the satellite messenger led search and rescue teams deep into a designated wilderness area. This was not a place for casual day hikes. It was rugged and demanding terrain, characterized by steep ascents, dense pine forests, and scree slopes that could shift treacherously underfoot. The air was thinner here, and the weather was notoriously unpredictable. For the SAR teams, the hike to the last known location was an exhausting effort undertaken with a powerful sense of urgency. They knew that in the wilderness, time was the enemy. Arriving at the location late on Thursday afternoon, the teams found exactly what the digital marker had indicated: a camp. But the scene they found did not provide the clear answers they had hoped for. Instead, it deepened the mystery in a profoundly unsettling way. It was a small clearing set near a stream, the kind of spot experienced backpackers would choose. The girls' 2-person tent was correctly pitched and zipped shut. There was a cold fire pit, indicating that no fire had been lit for at least a day, maybe more. And scattered around the immediate vicinity was gear. But it wasn't just some gear, it was almost all of it. The 2 distinctive royal blue backpacks, the same ones seen in the photograph Sarah had provided, were propped against a log, packed and ready to travel. Inside the tent, investigators found rolled-up sleeping bags, neatly stowed clothing, and the rest of their food supplies, all intact. Water filtration systems, first aid kits, headlamps, all the essentials for wilderness survival were present and accounted for. And sitting prominently on a flat stone near the fire pit was the satellite messenger. It was powered on, the small indicator light blinking rhythmically, but it had not been moved. The scene was baffling in its normalcy. There were no signs of a struggle. The ground was undisturbed, showing no indications of a confrontation or a hurried retreat. There was no blood, no torn clothing, and no evidence of an animal attack. The campsite was clean, with food properly stored in bear-proof containers, indicating the girls had followed wilderness protocols. It appeared, for all intents and purposes, as if Chloe and Samantha had simply gotten up and walked away from their camp, leaving everything behind. This scenario immediately paralyzed the investigation with a single, agonizing question. Why? Why would 2 experienced, intelligent hikers who understood the risks of the wilderness abandon their camp with no supplies? Why leave behind their food, their water filters, and most critically, their only lifeline to the outside world? It contradicted everything known about their training and their personalities. The discovery of the abandoned camp triggered a massive escalation of the search effort. The initial teams were quickly supplemented by ground crews, canine units, and aerial support. The scale of the operation was immense, covering miles of incredibly difficult terrain radiating out from the camp. Helicopters flew low, scanning the slopes and valleys, while ground teams meticulously combed the dense undergrowth. Sarah Miller, along with Samantha's parents, maintained a constant vigil at the SAR command center established at the trailhead. The atmosphere was tense, a mix of focused professionalism and profound empathy. Sarah, in particular, was relentless, pressing the incident commanders for updates, suggesting areas they might have gone. She was desperate to contribute anything that might help find her daughter. Back at the campsite, forensic investigators began the painstaking process of examining the items left behind, hoping to find some clue, however small, that could explain the girl's disappearance. They cataloged each item with meticulous care, but the physical evidence yielded nothing immediate. However, among the personal items found inside the tent, one object stood out as unusual, not because it was incriminating, but because it offered a potential glimpse into their intentions. It was a specialized regional guide to alpine flora, a detailed reference for identifying rare plants found in the highlands. This wasn't a standard hiking guide. It was specific and academic. Inside the guide, several pages had been carefully marked with small adhesive tabs. These pages detailed specific species of rare wildflowers known to bloom for only a short period in late summer, and only at higher elevations near the camp. This discovery offered the first tangible theory. It suggested that perhaps Chloe and Samantha had planned a short hike or a foraging trip near the campsite. If they were planning to ascend a nearby ridge to look for these specific flowers, it might explain why they hadn't taken their heavy backpacks. They might have assumed it would be a quick trip, maybe only an hour or two. This theory explained the abandoned gear, but it did not explain why they never returned. A short hike should not have ended in disaster. Even if they had gotten lost or injured, they were close enough to the camp that they should have been found quickly. The search continued for days, extending into weeks. The focus remained on the areas highlighted in the guide, the higher elevations and ridges surrounding the camp, but the terrain was treacherous, and rescuers found nothing. Not a dropped water bottle, not a piece of clothing snagged on a branch, not a footprint leading away from the immediate vicinity of the camp. It was as if the mountain itself had erased all trace of their presence. As the investigation dragged on, the pressure mounted. Reports and sightings began to flood in. One report, in particular, seemed promising and caused a significant diversion of resources. The owner of a supply store in a small town about 30 miles from the trailhead contacted authorities claiming he had seen two young women who matched Chloe and Samantha's description on the afternoon of Tuesday, August 14, the day they likely disappeared from the camp. He reported that the women appeared distressed and were seen arguing near an old, rusted pickup truck. This lead was taken seriously. It suggested the possibility that the girls had made it out of the wilderness and encountered someone dangerous. Investigators spent valuable time tracking down the store owner, reviewing security footage, and trying to identify the pickup truck. Sarah and the Hayes family waited in agonizing suspense. But after a thorough investigation, the lead disintegrated. The women seen arguing were ultimately identified as unrelated hikers who had been traveling through the area at the same time. It was a dead end, a frustrating detour that cost the investigation valuable time. By mid-September, the weather in the highlands began to change. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the threat of early snowstorms loomed. The massive search operation that had involved hundreds of people was reluctantly scaled back. The active search was called off. The complete absence of any trace of Chloe and Samantha left investigators baffled and the families devastated. The wilderness held its secrets jealously. The case of the missing backpackers, marked by the unsettling stillness of their abandoned campsite, began its slow descent into the cold case unit files. 5 years passed, 5 summers where the snows melted and wildflowers bloomed, and 5 winters where the highlands were locked under a thick white blanket. The disappearance of Chloe Miller and Samantha Hayes had become a regional ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered among hikers and locals. The initial frenzy of media attention had long since faded, replaced by the quiet, enduring agony of the families left behind. For Sarah Miller, the passage of time brought no closure. She refused to let the case fade completely. She organized numerous private searches, hiring specialized teams and experienced trackers to comb the areas that the official search might have overlooked. But every effort yielded the same result: nothing. Then came the summer of 2015. In early September, during the peak of the elk rutting season, Jedediah Croft was tracking a large bull deep in a remote section of the forest. Jedediah was a seasoned hunter in his 50s, a local who knew these mountains intimately. He had spent decades tracking game through the dense forests and rugged terrain. This area was far from any established trail, miles away from the original 2011 search grid where Chloe and Samantha had disappeared. It was characterized by dense old-growth forests, steep ravines, and difficult access. The kind of place few people ventured into. Jedediah was accompanied by his tracking dog, a well-trained blue-tick coonhound named Duke. They had been walking for hours, moving slowly and deliberately through the thick underbrush. The air was cool and damp, scented with pine and decaying leaves. As they moved through a particularly dense section of forest, Duke suddenly veered off the trail they were following. The dog became agitated, whining and sniffing the ground with frenetic intensity. Jedediah watched him initially, assuming he had picked up the scent of a smaller animal. But Duke's behavior was unusual. He wasn't tracking. He was focused on a single point near the base of a huge old tree that had been toppled, likely by a storm years ago. With its massive root ball exposed to the elements, Duke began to dig frantically, sending soil and debris flying. Jedediah called him off, but the dog ignored him, consumed by whatever scent he had detected. Jedediah approached to investigate, assuming the dog had found a burrow. After a few minutes of intense digging, Duke managed to pull something from the disturbed earth. He turned and trotted back toward Jedediah, dropping the object at his feet. Jedediah looked down, expecting to see a stick or perhaps a piece of scavenged animal bone, but what he saw made his blood run cold. It was a bone, yes, but it wasn't from an animal. It was weathered and discolored, stained dark brown by the soil, but its shape was unmistakable. It was a human hip bone, a pelvis. Jedediah stood frozen, staring at the object. The silence of the forest suddenly felt oppressive. He had spent his life in these woods, finding the remains of countless animals, but he had never stumbled upon human remains. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He secured Duke, who was still whining and eager to return to the digging site. Jedediah's heart was pounding in his chest. He knew he had to investigate further. He approached the toppled tree cautiously, his hunter's instincts taking over. The ground where Duke had been digging was disturbed, the dark, rich soil contrasting with the surrounding forest floor. He knelt down, using a sturdy stick to carefully push aside more dirt and debris. Almost immediately, he uncovered more bones. They were scattered and incomplete, suggesting they had been buried for a significant period and possibly disturbed by animals. He recognized vertebrae, ribs, and fragments of limb bones. And then he found it. He carefully brushed away a thick layer of compacted soil and pine needles, revealing a segment of a human spine. It consisted of several vertebrae held together by dried ligaments, but it wasn't the bones themselves that made Jedediah recoil in horror. Lodged violently between two of the vertebrae was a crudely made, rusted arrowhead. It was a chilling sight. The metal was dark brown and orange from corrosion, but its shape was distinctive. A flat, triangular head with sharp, defined barbs designed to prevent easy extraction. The shaft of the arrow was gone, broken away, leaving only the menacing head embedded deep within the bone. The implications were immediate and horrifying. This was not an accidental death. This was murder, and the weapon was unlike anything Jedediah had seen used in modern times. Jedediah stood up, his mind reeling. He was deep in the wilderness, miles from any cell reception. He knew he had to report this immediately, but he also knew he couldn't simply leave the remains exposed. He made a difficult decision. He carefully packed the spinal segment, the undeniable proof of a violent death, wrapping it in a spare jacket and placing it securely in his backpack. He then covered the remaining bones with branches and debris, concealing the site as best as he could. He marked the location on his GPS unit, taking precise coordinates of the burial site. He knew he needed to get to a place where he could contact authorities. He began the long trek out of the wilderness, moving with a speed fueled by adrenaline and a profound sense of duty. He knew of a remote cabin about 5 miles away, owned by a friend who had a satellite phone for emergencies. The hike out was tense. Jedediah felt the weight of the spinal segment in his backpack, a grisly burden. He couldn't stop thinking about the arrowhead, its archaic design suggesting a story far stranger and more sinister than he could imagine. After several hours of grueling hiking, he reached the cabin, retrieved the hidden key, and went inside. He turned on the satellite phone, waiting impatiently for it to acquire a signal. Before making the call, he took the spinal segment out of his backpack and placed it on a wooden table. The artificial light of the cabin highlighted the texture of the bone and the corroded metal. He took several photographs of the evidence with his digital camera, making sure he had a record of the discovery. Then, with a deep breath, he dialed the number for the state police. He explained the situation, his voice strained but steady, providing the images and the precise coordinates of the burial site. He told them about the hip bone, the scattered remains, and the arrowhead embedded in the spine. The authorities on the other end of the line mobilized immediately, assembling a team of investigators and forensic experts. For the first time in 5 years, there was a break in the case, but the nature of the discovery suggested that the answers they were about to uncover would be darker than anyone had imagined. The coordinates provided by Jedediah Croft led investigators to a section of the wilderness that required hours of difficult hiking. The atmosphere among the team was somber and focused. They knew they were walking into a crime scene, one that had been hidden for years. The remoteness of the location underscored the chilling reality that whoever had buried the remains had intended for them never to be found. Upon arrival, the team immediately secured the area. The scene was exactly as Jedediah had described: the toppled old tree, the disturbed earth, and the scattered skeletal remains. Investigators began the painstaking process of documenting the scene, photographing every detail before anything was moved. The excavation of the burial site was a meticulous operation. The remains were incomplete and scattered, indicating significant animal activity and environmental exposure over the years. The bones were carefully collected, cataloged, and packaged for transport. The spinal segment with the embedded arrowhead that Jedediah had handed over to the first responding officers was treated with the utmost care, recognized as the centerpiece of the investigation. The remains were transported to the State Forensic Anthropology Lab, where the identification process began. The initial analysis was challenging. The bones were weathered and degraded, making DNA extraction difficult. There were no surgical implants or distinctive medical devices that could provide a quick identification. Initial attempts to match the remains with missing persons databases failed. The frustration among the investigators was palpable. They had found human remains, undeniable proof of a murder, but they could not identify the victim. The possibility that this discovery was unrelated to the disappearance of Chloe and Samantha loomed, a prospect that would only deepen the mystery of their fate. While the forensic anthropologists worked on the identification, the focus of the investigation shifted to the weapon. The arrowhead embedded in the spine was highly unusual, a strange anomaly in a contemporary crime. It was sent to experts in metallurgy and archaeology for analysis. The results were startling. The arrowhead was not a modern hunting tip. It was made of iron, heavily corroded, and its design was archaic. Experts identified it as a replica of a frontier or pseudo-antique style arrowhead. The type, often made by hobbyists or historical reenactors, was crudely made, yet lethally effective. This discovery fundamentally altered the nature of the investigation. It suggested a killer who used primitive weapons, someone with specialized skills and perhaps a disturbing fascination with the past. The use of such a weapon felt personal and deeply violent. It raised questions about the killer's motives. Why use an arrow when a firearm would be far more efficient? The investigation stalled, caught between the difficulty of identifying the remains and the strangeness of the weapon. Detective Chris Garrison, the lead investigator assigned to the cold case, realized they needed more evidence from the burial site. He ordered a meticulous secondary grid search of the surrounding area, expanding the search perimeter deeper into the dense woods. It was during this secondary search that the breakthrough they needed finally came. Embedded in the complex root system of a nearby tree, hidden under years of accumulated forest debris, investigators found fragments of a human skull and a partial jawbone. These new findings were rushed to the forensic lab. The presence of the jawbone and teeth offered a new avenue for identification: dental records. The forensic odontologist began the painstaking process of reconstructing the partial jaw and comparing the teeth to the dental records of known missing persons. The process was slow, requiring comparisons of X-rays, fillings, and the unique characteristics of each tooth. After days of intensive analysis, a positive match was made. The remains belonged to Samantha Hayes. The identification hit the investigative team and the families with the force of a physical blow. After 5 years of uncertainty, they finally had an answer about Samantha's fate. But the answer was horrific. She hadn't died in an accident. She hadn't succumbed to the elements. She had been murdered, shot in the back with an archaic weapon, and buried in a shallow grave deep in the wilderness. Sarah Miller and the Hayes family were devastated. The confirmation of Samantha's death extinguished the last glimmer of hope that she might somehow still be alive. The grief was overwhelming, compounded by the violence of her death. But the discovery also raised a new and agonizing question. Where was Chloe Miller? The excavation of the burial site had been exhaustive. Forensic experts were certain the remains found belonged to a single individual. There was absolutely no trace of Chloe at the scene. No clothing, no personal items, and no DNA evidence. The absence of Chloe's remains presented a terrifying dichotomy. Had she met the same fate as Samantha, her body buried elsewhere in the vast wilderness, or had she impossibly survived the attack, witnessed her best friend's murder, and managed to escape? The investigation now faced a dual challenge: identify the killer responsible for Samantha's murder and locate Chloe. The discovery of Samantha's remains had closed one chapter of the mystery, but it had opened another. The archaic arrowhead, once a strange anomaly, now became the key to unlocking the identity of a killer who had evaded justice for 5 years. The investigation pivoted toward finding individuals known to possess and use such unusual weapons, a search that would lead them into the dark heart of the Colorado wilderness and the fringes of society. The identification of Samantha Hayes and the nature of her death galvanized the investigation. It was now a homicide. Detective Rice Garrison, an experienced investigator with a reputation for solving cold cases, took the lead. His immediate focus was on the weapon. The frontier-style arrowhead was the most distinctive piece of evidence they had, and Garrison believed it was the key to identifying the killer. The investigation shifted to identifying individuals or groups known for using such primitive weapons. In the rugged landscape of the Montana mountains, this search led them to a specific subculture: survivalists, preppers, and those who practiced primitive skills. Garrison's team began investigating local groups known for their self-sufficiency and distrust of the government. Their attention soon focused on one specific community, a reclusive and anti-government survivalist group living on an isolated compound deep in the region. This group was known for practicing traditional hunting techniques, including forging and using handmade weapons. They were notoriously hostile toward outsiders and had a history of conflict with local and park authorities. The group became the primary focus of the investigation. The theory was plausible. Perhaps Chloe and Samantha had stumbled onto the group's territory, or maybe they had encountered group members while hiking, leading to a confrontation that turned violent. Garrison began to investigate the group's history, looking for any connection to the area where Samantha's remains were found. He discovered that the group had been the subject of several investigations over the years, primarily related to illegal poaching and unauthorized use of public land. One incident, in particular, caught his attention. In 2010, a year before the disappearance, Park Service authorities and Fish and Wildlife officers had conducted a raid on the group's compound regarding illegal poaching allegations of protected species. The raid had been contentious, resulting in several arrests and the confiscation of numerous weapons. As Garrison reviewed the records from the 2010 raid, he focused on the inventory of confiscated items. The list included firearms, but also a significant number of handmade bows and arrows described in the report as primitive and frontier style. The connection was electrifying. The murder weapon matched the description of the weapons confiscated from the group. Suspicion immediately fell on the group members who were known for their expertise in primitive archery. One individual in particular emerged as the prime suspect. Silas Vance, the group's leader in his 60s, was known for his virulent anti-government rhetoric and hostility toward authority. He was an expert tracker and hunter, and crucially, Garrison discovered that Vance had an expired hunting permit for the specific area where Samantha's remains were discovered. The circumstantial evidence against Vance was compelling. He had the means and the opportunity. The investigation focused on building a case against him. In the spring of 2015, armed with a search warrant, authorities executed a raid on the survivalist compound. The operation was high risk. Given the group's known hostility and their access to weapons, tactical teams moved quickly, securing the compound and detaining the residents. The atmosphere was tense. The compound was a collection of crudely built cabins and workshops surrounded by dense woods. The residents were defiant and uncooperative, seeing the raid as another example of government overreach. During the meticulous search of the compound, investigators found exactly what they were looking for. In one of the workshops, they discovered forging equipment, tools for making arrowheads, and several completed arrows. These arrows were identical in style to the murder weapon found embedded in Samantha's spine. The discovery seemed to confirm their suspicions. They had found the source of the weapon. Silas Vance was arrested and brought in for questioning. The interrogation room was small and sterile, a stark contrast to the rough environment Vance was accustomed to. Garrison led the questioning, presenting the evidence methodically. The arrowhead, the matching arrows found at the compound, and Vance's hunting permit for the area. Vance was defiant. He was a large man, hardened by years of living outdoors, and he radiated hostility. He refused to answer questions, responding only with anti-government rants and accusations of persecution. Garrison pressed him, focusing on the arrows. He demanded to know if Vance recognized the murder weapon. Vance finally broke his silence, but his answer was not what Garrison expected. He didn't confess. He counterattacked. He vehemently denied any involvement in the girl's disappearance or murder. He claimed the group was being framed, and then he dropped a bombshell. Vance insisted that the arrows found in Samantha's spine were not his. He claimed that during the 2010 raid, authorities had confiscated dozens of handmade bows and arrows, including the specific type of frontier-style arrowheads he was now being accused of using. He alleged that these confiscated arrows were never returned to them. He accused the authorities of stealing the arrows from government custody and using them to frame him and his community. The claim was extravagant, but it introduced a disturbing ambiguity into the investigation. Vance's alibi for August of 2011 was difficult to verify, given the isolated nature of the community and their refusal to cooperate with authorities. But the case against him remained circumstantial. They could not definitively prove that Vance possessed the specific murder weapon in 2011. Garrison was frustrated. Vance's claim seemed implausible, but his assertion about the confiscated arrows could not be ignored. If there was any truth to it, it meant the murder weapon could have come from a completely different source. The investigation stalled, caught in a web of accusations and uncertainty. The focus shifted from the survivalist compound to the internal records of the authorities themselves. Garrison needed to know what had happened to those confiscated arrows. The investigation into Silas Vance and the survivalist group had hit a dead end. While Vance remained the prime suspect, investigators could not definitively link him or anyone else in the group to the murder of Samantha Hayes. The shadow of doubt cast by Vance's aggressive claim about the confiscated arrows loomed over the case. Detective Garrison found himself in a difficult position. He could not dismiss Vance's claim. If the arrows had been taken into custody by authorities in 2010 and had subsequently disappeared, there was the possibility that someone else, someone with access to the evidence, could be involved. Garrison decided to thoroughly verify Vance's claim. It was a tedious and bureaucratic process, but necessary to ensure the integrity of the investigation. He ordered a full audit of the Park Service's evidence depot, where the confiscated items from the 2010 raid were originally stored. The evidence depot was a secure facility governed by protocols to manage and track evidence. The audit involved reviewing years of logs, inventories, and chain of custody documents. It was a painstaking process that required meticulous attention to detail. Garrison assigned a team of forensic accountants and internal affairs investigators to conduct the audit. They spent weeks poring over the records, comparing the inventory from the 2010 raid to the current evidence depot inventory. The records were messy and incomplete, reflecting years of bureaucratic inertia and inconsistent management. But as the auditors dug deeper, they began to uncover significant irregularities in the evidence logs related to the confiscated arrows. And then they found the discrepancy. The records confirmed that the confiscated arrows, dozens of them matching the description of the murder weapon, had been stored in the evidence depot after the 2010 raid, but they were no longer there. The auditors traced the chain of custody, looking for documentation that would explain where the arrows had gone. They found what they were looking for in the logs from the summer of 2011. The records showed that the confiscated arrows had been checked out of the storage facility on July 15, 2011, just 4 weeks before Chloe and Samantha disappeared. The discovery was electrifying. The timing was too precise to be a coincidence. The murder weapon had been in the custody of the authorities and had disappeared just weeks before the murder. Garrison personally reviewed the checkout log. His eyes scanned the details of the entry, looking for the reason the arrows had been removed from storage. The justification cited was innocuous. Materials needed for an educational exhibit on primitive hunting. This explanation seemed plausible, but the records also showed that the items were never returned. They had simply vanished from the system. Garrison's focus shifted to the name on the checkout log. The person who had checked out the arrows was a Park Service officer. The name was Trevor Stone. The revelation hit Garrison like a lightning bolt. A park ranger, someone entrusted with protecting the park and its visitors. The implications were staggering. Garrison immediately ordered a background check on Trevor Stone. The results were disturbingly normal. Stone was still an active and highly respected park ranger with an immaculate service record spanning more than 2 decades. He was known for his extensive knowledge of the park, his dedication to his job, and his calm, professional demeanor. Garrison reviewed Stone's personnel file, looking for any red flags, any disciplinary actions, any indication of instability. There was nothing. Stone was a model employee. But the background check also revealed a crucial detail. Trevor Stone had been involved in the initial 2011 search operation for the missing girls. He had been one of the first responders on the scene, involved in the search for the abandoned campsite and the subsequent massive search effort. The fact that Stone had acquired the weapons shortly before the disappearance and then participated in the search for the victims immediately changed the focus of the investigation. The possibility that a park ranger, someone who knew the wilderness intimately and had access to confiscated weapons, was involved in the murder was a chilling prospect. Garrison knew they had to proceed with extreme caution. Accusing a respected park ranger of murder was a high-risk move that required irrefutable evidence. The investigation entered a new and dangerous phase. The focus shifted from the fringes of society to the heart of the establishment, the realization that the killer could have been hiding in plain sight, embedded within the very organization, tasked with protecting the park, cast a dark shadow over the entire investigation. Garrison knew that if Stone was the killer, he was a predator who used his position and his knowledge of the wilderness to hunt his victims. The investigation moved toward uncovering the secrets hidden behind the facade of a respected park ranger. The discovery of Trevor Stone's name on the evidence checkout log fundamentally altered the trajectory of the investigation. Detective Garrison understood the gravity of the situation. Stone was a respected park ranger with intimate knowledge of the terrain and the inner workings of the Park Service. They needed to build a case against him meticulously. Authorities placed Stone under discreet surveillance. The objective was to observe his behavior and gather evidence without alerting him to their suspicion. The surveillance operation was challenging, given Stone's familiarity with the park and his training. Surveillance teams observed Stone for weeks. His behavior seemed normal, adhering to his routine patrols and duties. But as the surveillance continued, they began to notice anomalies. Stone was making long, seemingly unauthorized trips to extremely remote sections of the park during his patrols, areas far from any established trail or point of interest. He would disappear for hours at a time, his movements difficult to track in the dense wilderness. While the surveillance was ongoing, Garrison decided to review the old case files from the 2011 investigation, looking for any previous connection between Stone and the victims. He focused on the days leading up to the disappearance, specifically the hike the girls took with Sarah Miller 5 days before they vanished. Garrison recalled that the preparatory hike had begun at the park's visitor center. He requested the security footage from the visitor center for that day, August 11, 2011. The footage was grainy and low resolution, typical of the technology of the time, but still visible. Garrison spent hours reviewing the images, observing visitors coming and going. He focused on the time when Sarah, Chloe, and Samantha were known to be at the center. And then he saw it. In the background of a shot near the topographical map exhibit, he saw a figure in a park ranger uniform. The figure was partially obscured, but the profile was recognizable. It was Trevor Stone, standing motionless, seemingly observing Chloe and Samantha as they reviewed the maps. He remained there for several minutes, his attention focused on them before he walked out of the frame. The observation was subtle, but in the context of the investigation, it was profoundly disturbing. It suggested that Stone might have noticed the girls days before their disappearance, that he might have been stalking them, planning his attack. Armed with the evidence log discrepancy and the CCTV footage, Garrison decided it was time to confront Stone. Authorities brought him in for questioning under the pretense of a routine review of the 2011 search operation. The interrogation began casually. Stone was calm and cooperative, recounting his participation in the search with professional detachment. But when Garrison shifted the focus to the confiscated arrows and the evidence log, Stone's demeanor changed. When confronted with the checkout log bearing his signature, Stone visibly tensed. His calm facade cracked. He stumbled over his words, offering a rambling explanation about the educational exhibit, claiming he had simply forgotten to return the arrows. Garrison pressed him, pointing out the timing of the checkout just weeks before the disappearance. Stone's composure evaporated. He immediately stopped speaking and requested a lawyer. The interrogation ended, but Garrison had what he needed. Stone's reaction confirmed their suspicions. They now had probable cause to execute a search warrant on his residence. Stone lived in an isolated house at the edge of the park, a remote property surrounded by dense woods. The isolation of the location underscored the chilling possibility that he could have carried out his horrific activities without detection. Investigators executed an emergency search warrant on the property. Tactical teams moved quickly, securing the house and the surrounding area. The search of the house itself revealed nothing incriminating. It was tidy and organized, the home of a solitary man. But the search was far from over. The property included a detached workshop, a large, sturdy building used to store equipment and tools. Investigators focused their attention on this structure. The workshop was cluttered but organized. But as investigators meticulously searched the space, they noticed something unusual about the workbench. It was heavy and appeared to be bolted to the floor. They managed to move the workbench, revealing a hidden, reinforced basement door beneath it. The discovery sent a wave of adrenaline through the investigative team. The basement door was locked, secured with a heavy padlock. They broke the lock and pried open the door, revealing a set of stairs leading into darkness. The air emanating from the basement was cold and stale, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something indescribable but profoundly unsettling. investigators descended the stairs, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. What they found was a scene straight out of a nightmare. The basement was small, about 10 feet by 10 feet. It was soundproofed, the walls lined with thick insulation material. The space was dimly lit by a single bare light bulb. It showed clear evidence of long-term human habitation. There was a small cot in the corner covered with soiled bedding. A bucket in the opposite corner served as a toilet. But it was the other details that revealed the true horror of the place. Heavy metal restraints were bolted to the walls and floor. There were signs of a prolonged struggle, scratches on the walls and dark stains on the floor. Investigators collected samples of the stains, suspecting they were blood. The evidence suggested severe and prolonged abuse. The atmosphere in the basement was oppressive, heavy with the weight of the suffering that had occurred there. The realization hit the investigators with devastating force. This was where he had kept her. The focus of the investigation shifted back to the surrounding property. If Stone had kept someone captive in the basement, where were they now? Following tracks that led from the workshop into the deep woods behind the property, corpse dogs were brought in to search the area. The dogs moved quickly, sniffing the ground intensely. After a short search, one of the dogs alerted near a shallow depression in the ground, whining and refusing to move. Investigators secured the area and began to excavate. The digging was slow and careful, the tension mounting with every shovelful of soil removed. They didn't have to dig deep. Approximately 2 feet down, they discovered human remains. The remains were quickly identified. They belonged to Chloe Miller. The discovery was heartbreaking. After 4 years, Chloe had finally been found. But the circumstances of her discovery were horrifying. Forensic analysis of Chloe's remains revealed a truth far more devastating than anyone had imagined. Her death had occurred significantly later than Samantha's. The forensic pathologist estimated her time of death to be around late 2014 or early 2015. The timeline was agonizing. Chloe had been held captive by Stone for approximately 4 years after Samantha was murdered. The realization shattered the investigation team and the families. While the search had gone cold, while the world had moved on, Chloe had been alive, suffering unimaginable horrors in that dark basement. The knowledge that she might have been saved, that she had endured years of captivity, was a burden that would haunt everyone involved in the case. The wilderness had hidden a monster, a predator who used his uniform and his knowledge of the park to perpetrate a crime of unimaginable cruelty. The discovery of the hidden basement and the remains of Chloe Miller blew the case wide open. The evidence against Trevor Stone was overwhelming, painting a horrifying picture of premeditated murder, kidnapping, and prolonged torture. Stone was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murders of Samantha Hayes and Chloe Miller, along with a litany of charges related to Chloe's long-term abuse and captivity. With Stone in custody, investigators were able to reconstruct the terrifying sequence of events that led to the tragedy. The theory they developed was chilling in its calculated cruelty. Investigators concluded that Stone first became aware of the girls during the preparatory hike they took with Sarah Miller 5 days before their disappearance. The CCTV footage from the visitor center suggested he had observed them, perhaps obsessing over them, and began to plan his attack. He used his expert knowledge of the park to track them to their remote campsite. Authorities believe he ambushed them on the morning of Tuesday, August 14, 2011. The exact details of the attack remained unknown, but the evidence suggested Samantha resisted and was killed immediately, shot in the back with the archaic arrow. Stone then abducted Chloe, forcing her to leave the campsite without any supplies, explaining the unsettling stillness of the abandoned camp. He took her to his secluded residence and imprisoned her in the soundproofed basement. The use of the stolen arrows from the evidence depot was a calculated move designed to throw off any future investigation. Stone knew about the survivalist group and their history of conflict with the authorities. He used the frontier-style arrowhead specifically to frame them, betting on the existing distrust between the group and law enforcement. He buried Samantha's body deep in the wilderness, miles from the camp, in an area he knew was rarely visited. For 4 years, Stone held Chloe captive, subjecting her to unimaginable abuse, all while continuing to work as a respected park ranger, hiding his monstrous secret in plain sight. The reasons for her eventual death remained unclear, whether he intentionally killed her or she succumbed to the prolonged abuse. Throughout the legal proceedings, Stone remained silent. He refused to confess, never explaining his motives, never offering details about the attack or Chloe's years of captivity. He offered no apology or remorse. Despite his silence, the evidence against him was insurmountable. The trial was a gut-wrenching experience, forcing the families to confront the horrific details of the crime. In late 2019, Trevor Stone was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. For Sarah Miller, the resolution of the case brought no peace, only a profound sense of agonizing loss. The knowledge that her daughter had been alive for years while the search had gone cold, suffering in darkness just miles away, was a torment that would never fade. The case of the missing hikers, which began with an image of youthful joy and adventure, ended in a revelation of unimaginable horror, a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide beneath the surface of the most beautiful landscapes.